I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guest, who you should all know by now, he's been on numerous times, is Rabbi Marvin Schwab of Temple Beth Shalom here in Santa Fe. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here again.
Glad to have you back. Today's prophetic topic is taking your rightful place among the angels. And this topic is extracted from the prologue of the book, The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven, Reviewing and Renewing Your Life on Earth by Dr. Ron Wolfson. The complete sentence reads as follows: if you can hear the questions and apply them to the way you live your life on earth today, then when the time comes, your soul will be ready to take that stairway to heaven, prepared to answer the 7 questions with the resounding yes and take your rightful place amongst the angels. So I want to just put a little history here, and then we're going to turn this over to the rabbi. We were going to do this show right before the high holidays, Jewish high holidays. We didn't because of some technical problems. We didn't get it on the air before the holidays, so we were doing it after the holidays. But can we talk about why you had suggested and sounded like you wanted to do this before the holidays?
Well, the Jewish high holy days are really a time of doing what's called cheshbon hanefesh in Hebrew, an accounting of the soul. It's not just celebrating a new year, but really looking at clearing the slate and having a fresh start in the new year by righting wrongs that you've done. And as you're looking at your life to see where you could have done better, these questions seem to fit because they're a great way to look at what matters in your life, what counts. The Jewish high holy days, in particular the Day of Atonement, is really supposed to be a near-death experience. And in terms of resetting priorities in your life, if you look at the things that annoy you day to day in the shadow of the grave, I think they take on a little different value.
So is the fasting, we're talking about Yom Kippur.
Yes.
Is the fasting supposed to get you closer to that near-death experience? Is that what it's about?
That's part of it. It's a denial of your physical needs and your physicality. And think about it. If you don't eat and you don't drink for 24 hours, you don't think about what am I going to have for breakfast? Where am I going to go for lunch? And as you move away from your intake, your output's decreased. So you don't have to get up and go to the bathroom. You don't get up and go get a drink of water. All of the things that distract you that are based on the body for this one day, you set aside. And you try to become thereby, as much as possible, a spiritual being rather than a physical being. Now, if you follow the tradition very closely, you don't bathe on that day, you don't shave on that day, you don't put on any perfume, no underarm deodorant. You're in ketoacidosis, so your breath has a smell. You probably haven't brushed your teeth. You begin to look, by the end of the day, you begin to look pretty awful, and you're probably not so nice to be around either.
Smell even worse, yes.
But you're doing it as a communal thing, as a group effort, and that's to give each other strength.
So we do a yearly review of our life.
At least.
And if I remember correctly, then part of the process was to symbolically go to a body of water and cast off our sins.
Right, that's on Rosh Hashanah, or in the days in between. And the symbolism is this. if it's done on the holiday, you're not supposed to be carrying anything. Your pockets are theoretically empty. So you go to a river, a lake, a well, a cistern, whatever you have, and you turn your pockets inside out. And even though they're supposed to be empty, you always find some lint, some grit, something in there that, this pocket is empty, and then you discover, well, no, it's not. And just the symbolism then is, just as you think you've cleansed your soul, and you think you're now flawless, no, you're not. Okay, there's always something hidden. By the way, this actually gets repeated on Passover. As a preparation for Passover, where there's a search for leavening within the house, you clean the house within an inch of its life, save some leavened crumbs, some bits of bread, which you then hide for yourself, and then search at midnight with a candle to find it. And again, the symbolism is, you think you've cleaned everything out, there's still more to find. And it speaks to our humanity, that we're just not going to be perfect beings. But we strive. There's an issue here of not beating yourself up because you're not perfect, but it doesn't take you out of the endeavor to try and perfect the soul and perfect our lives. It's an ongoing thing. And that Passover comes 6 months after the Jewish High Holy Days, gives you that balance in the year of not letting things go too far.
So a little mid-year check-in, so
yes,
to speak.
Yeah.
Taking your own inventory in a sense.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the book. Dr. Ron Wolfson, what can you tell us about him and his motivation to write this book?
Well, he considers himself an educator. He's very involved with his religion. And he's willing to ask questions as he goes along about what's our mode of worship, what's working for us within Judaism and what isn't. And the motivation for writing the book is really to encourage people not to wait until they're dead to answer these questions, but to answer them while they're alive when they can still do something about the answers. It's interesting. There are the 7 questions that he comes up with, 6 of which were ascribed to a rabbi who lived about 2,000 years ago, and who's quoted in the Talmud, in Jewish oral law, in tradition. And one of the questions comes from a period of 200 to 300 years ago, so it's a more modern rabbi. But the first 6 in the book all go back to Jewish oral law, or Jewish oral tradition. And I think he wrote the book because these are such fascinating questions, not just for what they turn out to be, but in part because of the way they're phrased. And they mean much more than just the simple question. And they reach into the deepest recesses of our lives. It's really interesting to me that what's not asked is, did you sin?
Yeah.
Did you believe in God? Did you pray enough? That's not asked. Now perhaps that may be implicit in the time frame, and given the rabbi who's known as Rava was asking, but nevertheless, that's not what is asked. My favorite question of all of them, I guess there are 2. My favorite is, why did you not partake of every permitted pleasure that was presented to you? Not, how come you did this? Why did you cheat there? But there's no accusation. It's, life is a gift. Why didn't you make the most of it? So at the High Holy Days, I asked the congregation, what's holding you back? Look at your lives in terms of, Why haven't you celebrated more? Why haven't you enjoyed more? What is holding you back from truly enjoying this life as much as you can?
I want to get to that, but I want to back up just for a minute,
Okay.
because that's a fantastic topic. But can you explain the role of oral tradition in Judaism, how it relates to the scriptures, how it complements, supplements them, and
Well, in Orthodox Judaism, the principle is that you can't read the written text by itself, because if you do, it will lead you astray. You need the oral tradition to tell you what the written text means. And I'll give you two examples.
just read my mind. I was going to ask you for two examples. For the sake of honesty, I was going to ask for one example, but okay.
But there are two that I think are important. The first one is a law that's known in Latin as lex talionis. It's about the extent of my Latin, by the way. This is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which is quoted and pointed to as a barbaric law, how terrible and awful. Gandhi even quotes it and gets it wrong when he says, an eye for an eye and the whole world will be blind.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that that's the written text. But we have an oral tradition that seems to have been contemporaneous with the written tradition. And the oral tradition tells us that this was never carried out in that way, that what it really means is fit the punishment to the crime. And something that we do today and take for granted in our own legal system is you pay damages. So it's not as if the ancient Jewish world or the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, was so barbaric. It was actually an advance for its time. So if you hit me in your car, right, I don't run over you in my car to do the same kind of damage. Or if in some way you blinded me, you cost me an eye, I'm not going to put your eye out and say, okay, now we're even. I'm going to ask, if this was on purpose, that there be some punishment, and that you pay me damages for what I've lost, which is exactly what Jewish oral tradition says. And in my proof text for it always existing is we've just come out of the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
or lean-tos. And in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, it says, you shall dwell in a sukkah, in a booth, for 7 days. Because I, God, caused you to dwell in Sukkot when I brought you out of Egypt. Okay. Well, if you ask most Jews who know what a sukkah is, they'll tell you it's a temporary dwelling. It's supposed to be shaky if the wind blows. It's supposed to give you more shade than sun. You're supposed to be able to see the stars through it. The roof is supposed to be organic, not subject to ritual impurity. It can't be more than 2 stories tall. It has to have at least 3 walls. There are all of these things about what make a sukkah a sukkah. Not one of those characteristics, not one, is mentioned in the Bible. It's all part of the oral tradition.
So let me throw this at you for a second.
Sure.
Without the oral tradition, what we're talking about could then be the basis for fundamentalist extremist interpretation.
That's right.
If you ignore the oral tradition, then it is an eye for an eye, and then we take everything literally word for word.
Which we don't in Judaism. We're forbidden to.
Yet there are those who do that.
Within Judaism, there are those who do that as fundamentalists. But by definition, if you're following the Jewish religion, you can't take the written text exactly as it is.
So fundamentalist extremist Judaism is really not Judaism then at all. It's just something that borrows from it.
I think fundamentalism, fanaticism in any religion is a perversion of the religion.
I agree.
But yes, I would say so. I take great umbrage. For instance, within the liberal Jewish world, liberal meaning religiously liberal, there are children who are brought up very liberal who decide to become more observant. And then they want to keep their level of kashrut, keeping kosher, more stringently than what they were brought up with. And their rabbi teaches them that they should not eat in their parents' house anymore because it's not strictly kosher. As far as I'm concerned, that rabbi has perverted the religion. Why? Because honoring mother and father made what I call the top 10 list for Mount Sinai.
Okay.
Keeping kosher did not. What we eat is not nearly as important as how we treat our parents or each other.
Mm-hmm.
And even though there are those who say there is no hierarchy for the various commandments in Judaism, there is. Certain things supersede others, including saving a human life, which supersedes all but 3 of every commandment in Judaism. There are only 3 that you don't do to save a life. You don't murder to save a life. You don't commit idolatry in public. And idolatry is not simply the worship of a statue. Biblically, what's going on with idolatry has all sorts of awful things: cruelty to animals, forced sexual relations with children. There are all sorts of really awful things that go on in ancient idolatry. And you don't commit incest in order to save a life or your own life. So if somebody were to come to me and say to me, I have to shoot you or they're going to kill me, the Jewish response is, kill me. I'm not going to commit murder to save my own life.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
no, that's a good segue. Because I think that's important to get out there, that what the oral traditions mean and how much importance and strength are behind them and tying it in together.
yes. And also, when you're dealing with a religion like Judaism, which traces its roots back some 4,000 years, it's not the same religion that it was 3,000 years ago. The world is not the same as it was 3,000 years ago. Human beings may be much the same, but there are certain changes, and we don't sacrifice animals and sprinkle the blood around the altar anymore. We haven't done that for about 2,000 years. Now the Torah says in Leviticus, these are the sacrifices you're to offer. We don't do that anymore. We substitute prayer for the animal sacrifices. So even when there's a written law, things have been shaped, cushioned, rough edges taken off, if you will, and in some ways, absolute substitutions made.
Well, what you're talking about is a living religion as opposed to a dictatorial religion. This is it, and that's the way we're going to do it from here on ever.
Or a museum piece.
Yeah, exactly.
The term rabbi does not come into use until the year 40 of the Common Era. Post-dating Jesus, by the way, not predating. But the rabbis really do a bloodless revolution, a coup d'etat within the religion. And they separate the hereditary leadership of the priestly class, the tribe of Levi,
Mm-hmm.
for a meritocracy. Anybody who's got the brains and the ability to become a leader can become a leader.
So now here's where my biblical scholarship is going to show for lacking. Aren't there references in the Gospels to Jesus being a rabbi? So what we're talking about then is a title bestowed retroactively?
Yes, it's a retrojection
Okay.
based on what they were seeing at that time. In the same way, there are groups, there were really political groups that seemed to come off as perhaps something else than the Gospels, and we ultimately know very little about them. The Pharisees, the Sadducees were really political groups within the religion, if you will, but still political groups. The scribes, these are the 3 sort of Jewish groups that are mentioned in the Gospels, but I'm not sure they necessarily functioned by the time the Gospels were written. And in 1977 or 78, I was once asked if I was a Sadducee or a Pharisee, which was the equivalent of asking me if I was a mugwump. You know,
Okay.
because those groups are gone. They're gone. We have a Pharisaic tradition within Judaism, which is part of what, by the way, gives the oral law its authenticity, its authority. Whereas the Sadducees apparently did not believe in the authority of the oral law. But neither group exists today.
That's it. When did they disappear?
I think by the time the rabbis really rise to power, they're gone. They're pretty much gone. They existed perhaps 200 years before the Common Era.
Okay.
Something in that range.
So let's go back to the 7 questions and
Okay.
an offshoot. One of the questions you talked about, what is, if I have these correct, is the 6th question, and we'll get to that, to the pleasure question. But I do want to talk about pleasure separate from the question, so let's do question 6 first.
Okay.
Do you think that there is a certain perception by the basic population, not just Judaism, but even all Abrahamic traditions, that there's something wrong with pleasure?
Well, there is the comment, if it looks good, feels good, or tastes good, it must be a sin.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. There is, well, let's put it this way. Within Judaism, there is the concept of Yetzer Hara. A Yetzer is an inclination. It comes from a verb that has to do with creation, creating, that human beings can create. The Yetzer Hara is the evil inclination. And there is a story that at one point the rabbis go to God and they say, we don't want the evil inclination anymore, take it away from us. So God does. And then babies stopped being born, chickens stopped laying eggs, crops stopped being planted or harvested, buildings were built. That all of these creative things that are part of life, an essential part of life, are from the Yetzer Hara. But are they evil? No. Sex in and of itself in Judaism is not considered evil. We don't have a concept of original sin.
Yeah, that came with Augustine in 500 something,
Yeah.
or 400 something.
So that's not part of our tradition. So one could ask then, well then why is sex seen as coming from the evil inclination? And my answer is because it has the potential for evil. It has the potential to be used as a weapon of manipulation, a weapon of denigration. And so there's a warning here about use these things carefully and wisely. A hammer can be used to build a house, something very important. But if you apply the same hammer to somebody's head, you can take a life. The hammer itself is just the tool.
Exactly.
So there's a question here of what was the motivation behind the use, etc. So when we talk about pleasure, pleasure can be abused. One piece of chocolate can be wonderful. 10 pieces of chocolate.
Be great.
Right. Truly. But it's like Lay's potato chips. Bet you can't eat just one. And that's where the difficulty comes in. In the same way that having a drink of liquor, Jews are not forbidden to drink alcohol. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's part of our ritual to drink wine. We see wine as a symbol of joy. Hard liquor is used from time to time. But if that's all you do, and you become an alcoholic, and you become a slave to the desire or the pleasure, whatever it gives you, then you're in trouble. I know somebody who found themselves on the street with their child, about 5 years old, and a gun battle broke out. This is a big city back east. And the person told me that they laid down on the ground, their little child was with them, and they saw a liquor store. This person happened to be an alcoholic. Forgot all about his son. All he wanted to do was go into the liquor store.
Yeah.
So there's, there are limits. Anything taken to an extreme is not good. Fasting on Yom Kippur may allow you to concentrate on your spirituality. If you fast every single day without a break, you'll die.
Mm-hmm.
So we're given tools. It's up to us to use them wisely. Even with these questions that are asked, it's up to us to apply them wisely.
Well, before we get to the questions, because every time you say something, it triggers another thought. You talk about evil inclination. Would it be fair to say, in some extent, that evil inclination is the Jewish concept of duality?
Yes, because there's an inclination to do good as well.
So we're here to
have both.
choose.
Absolutely, that's exactly it. It is our gift from God, if you will, to be able to choose between the two, to know the difference and choose. And therefore, it's up to us to choose, and again, choose wisely.
I agree. I mean, not only is it a gift, I think it's our mission. That's why we're here, is to learn the difference between the two and to choose the voice of spirit. I call the evil inclination the voice of ego. And don't want to get into the whole thing now because I want to get down to these questions, but
right.
Maybe another show. But, we're here to make those determinations and make those choices. And that's an interesting concept. I had not heard that term before, but as soon as you said it, okay. That makes a whole lot of sense.
Which also, by the way, since Judaism doesn't have a devil, then where's the source of evil? And the source of evil is, guess what?
Self.
Human choices.
Well, again, going back to even for not eating for the on Yom Kippur, it's about detaching in a lot of ways from just the self, the body, the physical, and just concentrating on the spirit. Mm-hmm. And all of it be able to show us that we're not here to engage in that and make that. You talk about the first commandment, that there should be no gods before me. But if God knows that there is no other gods, then what is God trying to tell us? And for me, the belief is, don't not only not idols, but don't create false gods. Don't make pleasure, don't make materialism, don't make whatever the thing that you worship to.
Which, of course, we have a tendency to do.
Which we hear, that's the evil inclination that we're here to overcome.
To make idols of success, money, status, to the detriment of those around us.
Yeah, which is a perfect segue into the 7 questions. So let's take them in the sequence that I'm familiar with them in. So the first question is, did you deal honestly with people in your business practices?
I love that question. I absolutely love that question because what Wilson says in the book is that implied in that question is, if I can't trust you with something as transitory, if you will, as money, then how can I trust you with anything? If you're not honest in business, are you going to be honest in your personal relationships? Are you going to take marriage vows seriously? Are you going to, where then do you draw the line? If you're going to cheat somebody, and by the way, that's a commandment that comes up several times in the 5 books of Moses, have honest weights and measures in your business. God cares if we're honest? Yeah, apparently. Because it stands for much more than that. If you can cheat somebody and don't, and by the way, that's another statement in the Torah, don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind, which the rabbis interpret as, in a business dealing, you can't take advantage of someone else's ignorance.
So is this, in a lot of sense, all these questions as we get to them, calling upon us to see the one common denominator we all have? We're all equal children of God.
I think that's part of it, yeah. But it's also to look at these different aspects of our lives that can seem fairly simple and ask at a simple level, am I being honest? Because if I'm not being honest in business, where else am I not? Am I lying to myself? What are the consequences? There's a question we'll come to that really deals with our own potential. So if I'm not honest in business, am I lying to myself? Am I allowing myself to be much less than I could be? Am I lying to my wife? Am I lying to my children? Am I lying to friends? Where does it stop?
And in fact, I'm then creating another false god, that this money or this perception of power is greater than the way I treat my fellow human beings.
And it also says that there will be an accounting. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter if there's an accounting or not after we're dead. The key is to bring ourselves to account for these things. And if we don't like the answers to the questions, we have it within our power to change them. As long as we're still alive, we can make a change. We can make ourselves better, which makes things better for those around us, those we care about, those we love. And that begins to have an effect on the entire world. And I think that's really the true importance of these questions. Even as a rabbi, I really don't care if God asks these questions when I'm dead or not. I really don't. I do care very much if I ask these questions of myself.
Let's talk about motivation here for a second. Judaism does not really have like a heaven or a hell.
Certainly no defined vision of it the way that Christianity does.
Judaism does not have a real concept, it does not talk about really like reincarnation or karma. So we have no real destination objectives. We have no real repeat motive. Let me finish 1 second.
Yeah.
So why, other than treating somebody rightly, what's in it for me?
Well, there are two things. First of all, while Judaism doesn't talk about reincarnation, it is open to that concept, which becomes a very interesting thing most people don't realize. Because Torah really says nothing about what happens when you die, therefore it can be open to all sorts of interpretations. The book of Ecclesiastes says, the body returns to the earth as it was, the soul returns to God who gave it. And that becomes the motivation, if you will. Whether or not there's reincarnation, that returning to God, what we do in this life and whatever follows, brings us closer to or further away from God.
So what does it say with regard to, okay, I return to God, what happens then? Is there any commentary? Does there add any insight or anything to that?
My best understanding is that before you can return to God based on what has happened in this life, there's a cleansing process you have to go through. Now, it sounds very mild, but I once heard someone describe a near-death experience. And he said that, he went through the tunnel, he saw the light at the end. With every fiber of his being, all he wanted to do was reunite with this light.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now imagine if there was one thing in the world, one single thing, that you wanted with every fiber of your being, every bit of your existence, was focused on wanting this one thing, and it was denied you. I can't think of a more exquisite description of the worst torture in the world, and in particular, when you don't have a wristwatch and you don't know how long it's going to last.
So that would almost come to the concept of purgatory.
Yes, or even for that matter, hell, in terms of a punishment. If can you imagine a more unbearable pain than if you wanted one single thing and that was denied you?
Well, I want to go back on something you said earlier in the show, because I know I'm curious. I've been curious all along, but I mean, what we've been talking about here is really way off topic, but it isn't. Oral tradition tempers the written
Yes.
word. The written word has a certain implication that God is judgmental and punishing. The oral tradition says, no, this is about fairness. We're just misinterpreting some of the ways things are presented, which is the concept for me of a loving, caring God. So then, if that is the context of the oral tradition, where does the concept of purgatory fit in?
Well, let me back up for a second.
Okay.
When we talk about the concept of God, you have a sister.
Yes.
When you were children, did you ever hit your sister?
Is the statute of limitations up?
Statute of
Yes.
limitations. Okay. All right. And if she told on you, Mommy, Daddy, look what he did to me. What kind of a parent did you want at that moment? Forgiving, understanding, all loving.
Yeah.
What kind of a parent did she want?
Retribution,
Punishing,
yes.
vengeful, right?
Yes.
So there's a place where, okay, I want to say don't put God in a box, which is what we tend to do.
Yes.
We want God to be all loving, all forgiving. Really? If somebody came in and murdered somebody in your family, you want this all loving and forgiving God to say, oh, I understand, poor baby. Jewish tradition, in terms of oral law even, in the Genesis narrative, there are two different names for God that are used. One of them is seen as connoting the attribute of mercy, and the other, judgment. And Jewish tradition says that's because the world can't stand on only one. If everything is forgiven automatically, pure mercy, you kill somebody, you're forgiven by God. If everything is pure judgment, you accidentally run a stop sign and you get put to death. So God is far more complex than that and more nuanced than that.
So that's kind of the roots of duality right there, is the two terms and phrases used in the beginning of the Old Testament.
And we actually have 13 different attributes for God within Judaism. And so when you look at, where does purgatory come from? This idea of what we do in this life doesn't just disappear, but has some effect on the soul, and therefore has to be corrected or purified, is the purgatory thing. And we have this thing in Judaism of saying Kaddish, a particular prayer, a doxology actually, that can redeem the soul. And that's supposed to help the soul reunite with God. So there's actually something that those we leave behind can do on our behalf to help the process. But for me, being the practical scientist that I tend to be, this is all speculation.
Of course, yes.
Nobody has come back to me to say, this is what it's like. There's a story about a guy who loved golf, and he tells his friend that, who's about to die, if you can, let me know if there's golf in heaven. You know the story?
No, go right ahead.
So the next week, his friend comes back and says, I've got good news and bad news. He says, really, what is it? He says, beautiful golf courses in heaven. Beautiful. Says, that's wonderful. What's the bad news? You're teeing off next Tuesday at 9. So,
beautiful.
Until we have somebody who really, that truly comes back. And again, the book of Ecclesiastes, which I dearly love, says, this is a mystery. If God had wanted us to really know, God would have told us. God didn't. So don't worry too much about it. In reality, there's nothing we can do about what follows this life other than live this life well.
Yeah, exactly.
Which brings us back to the 7 questions, because I think they're all designed to do that for us.
So let's jump to question number 2. Did you busy yourself with procreation? Did you leave a legacy?
What a religion. Did you have enough sex? One of the commandments that's given in Genesis to humans is be fruitful and multiply. But I think what's truly important here is the idea of leaving a legacy. What did you leave behind? I knew a man once, he's since passed away, he told me he owed nobody anything. He was a completely self-made man. And I thought it was the saddest thing I'd ever heard. He had no one to say thank you to. There was nobody in his life who taught him anything. There was nobody to whom he could be grateful. Nobody was a role model for him. How terribly sad. I owe gratitude to more people than I can count. I was not born knowing mathematics or being able to read. I had teachers. I had parents that showed me right from wrong. And in rabbinic school, I had people that truly showed me an extraordinary path and a way to deal with life.
So procreation then is not necessarily just a offspring. It's more towards a reinforcement of that legacy. What have I done to leave a positive imprint, so to speak, on the world that I walked on?
If there's wisdom that you've attained in this life, are you going to take it with you to the grave as a secret? Or are you going to pass it from generation to generation? Are you helping in this legacy? Part of this is, are you a teacher? Have you been a role model to anybody? Are you helping others be teachers and role models?
There's a beautiful quote that Buddha said, that the greatest masters are not the one with the most students. The greatest masters are the ones who create the most masters. Yeah, exactly. I mean, holding on to all this information is...
So what's the legacy? I mean,
self-serving.
I'm very privileged. There are children who will grow up, and for them, for their entire lives, I will be the rabbi with whom they became bar bat mitzvah. And hopefully along the way I've taught them some things. And so that's my legacy. I have a legacy.
So then the procreation is not necessarily our own offspring, but also how did we help train and teach the young?
And help others. Within Judaism, if you adopt, that's equivalent to procreating. And if you teach children, you're really taking on that role of parent. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that in Hebrew, things work on 3 root letters, and the root for parent, teacher, and Torah are all the same. It's the same root.
Yeah.
It's all bound together. So I think that did you procreate really has to do mostly with leaving behind the legacy.
Okay. Third question. Did you set times for study? And for Rava 2,000 years ago, this became important because, and as important as it is today, in that where are you spending your time? Is all your time going into trying to make money? And the real question here is, what are your priorities? Did you set priorities in your life? Did you make study a priority? I actually have people after the High Holy Days who are studying with me because I asked that question. Did you make a fixed time for study? Well, it's also study, but it's spiritual study, religious study. It's not just, I'm going to go figure out how to build a better house.
Right. The idea is what's called in Hebrew Torah Lishma, study for its own sake. But even that is false because that study for its own sake is supposed to have an effect on you. What you learn should have some bearing on your spirituality, how you live your life, how you see things. And Rava's asking us, did you set priorities in your life? Did you make family a priority? Are you spending enough time with your children? Which goes back to legacy. Some of these connect. But if you don't, in business there's this cute little saying, those who fail to plan to fail.
Yeah.
But I think it fits here. If you don't set some boundaries in your life will run you, not you run your life. And if that happens, there's no control. Where do you set aside the time to do the things that nurture you, that allow you to grow spiritually, to enhance your appreciation of beauty, to bring beauty into the world? If I don't set a priority to do acts of chesed, of loving kindness, they won't get done.
It would almost seem to me, we only did 3 out of 7, but they're all about attachment to that external validation and saying, am I attached to the outside or the inside?
Are you ready to get to the last one yet? Where are we time-wise?
We'll get there. Let's do 4 then. Did you hope for deliverance? Did you live with hope in your heart?
And I think that's extraordinary because I came across a quote, and I think it may have been from Madonna. I don't remember if it was Madonna or Bette Midler, honestly, and I'm sorry to get the two confused.
But you're confused.
Yeah. But one of them said, nothing changes. The world is just the same. What an awful thought. If you don't live with hope in your heart, if you don't live with hope that things can be better, why continue to live? It denies a basic human peace. Judaism says that we are partners with God in creating the world. Well, if I don't live with hope in my heart, if I don't think things are ever going to get any better in the Middle East, then just send an atomic bomb over there and get done with it. It's not going to get any better. I have no hope. You have to have hope. You have to believe that you can have a positive effect in this world. And that's what Rava is telling you when he asked that question. Did you live with hope in your heart? Can you still see, in spite of what may be going on right now, can you see a time that will be better? Now that may mean that I have an obligation to work to make that time come. But if I shut that off, if I close my eyes, it's all darkness. And I, for one, refuse to live that way. There are peace talks in the Middle East that may get canceled. Maybe they'll go on. I have to live with the hope in my heart that they will go on, because otherwise human beings are killing each other for nothing. Nothing. There's nothing worse in the world. Humans are supposed to be made in the divine image. When we kill somebody, we're obliterating that divine image from the world. It's an awful thing. We're taking away the potential. Again, in Jewish tradition, if you save one life, it's accounted to you as if you saved an entire world. Well, if you kill somebody, it's as if you've killed off an entire world. We can't know when someone dies what they could have been. Unless they die of natural causes at 120. Mm-hmm. They lived a full life. But you don't know. If Alexander Fleming had been killed off, would we have ever discovered penicillin? How long? And let's assume that we would have. All right, we'll discover penicillin anyway. How many years more would it have taken? How many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people would have died of infection without that? We can't know. Every life is precious. So when a war is fought, what are we losing? We'll never know. We'll never know. So we have to believe that if a sacrifice is made for war, that it's a hope that will bring something better, that there won't be war. There'll be peace. Mm-hmm. Even a lousy peace is better than the best war.
Amen to that. So, number 5, did you get your priorities straight?
Well, again, that goes to setting priorities in your life and what was important to you.
So, is it as basic as God, family, everybody else kind of deal?
Yeah, well, that, and we'll get to it, but there's a question of gifts too. Gifts that you're given.
Okay. So you want to go to 6 and we'll save 7 for after the announcements?
Sure.
6 is the one we started with. Were there earthly pleasures permitted to you that you did not enjoy? Did you enjoy this world?
Again, I think this is the most life-affirming, positive question that could be asked. It's urging us, it's trying to motivate us to make the most of this life. One thing we know, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, life, at least this time around, is short. And the older I get, the shorter it seems. And the faster it goes. So, am I enjoying this? And part of this enjoyment, I think it's a mistake if you look at this only as hedonistic, only as self-centered joy. Because there are other joys. Did I enjoy doing tzedakah, doing an act of kindness, of helping somebody? I get an enormous amount of joy in involvement with the emergency shelter here in town for the winter. 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 people died every year around Santa Fe from exposure to the cold in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
The last 2 years, 0, because of the emergency shelter that's been started. Are you getting pleasure out of that? By donating food, by donating money, by donating time, are you getting pleasure from that? That's also pleasure. People don't think about that. You know, one of the worst things in terms of a motto I ever heard was, give till it hurts. No! Give till it feels good.
Yes.
Give till it feels right. I'm a member of the Rotary Club in town in large part because of Polio Plus, which is on the verge of eradicating polio from the earth. And one of the members of the club, a new member, his grandfather was the last child in Cleveland, Ohio to contract polio. What a tragedy. If polio had been eradicated a day earlier, 2 days, who knows? He wouldn't have to go through this. I had a childhood friend who had polio. I mean, we have it within our power to eradicate this disease from the world. It takes time and effort and money. We started on this in the 1980s. It's now 2010. And we're now almost there.
And we should engage in it from a place of joy.
Yes.
Okay.
What a wonderful gift to be able to be somebody who can donate money to this, or time and effort, whatever. Are you taking pleasure in the opportunities of life that were given to you?
And is that your priorities straight? Let me interrupt. Let me do a couple of quick announcements. We'll come back with the last question. We've got a few minutes left. I don't want to talk too long, so I shouldn't even say that. Next week, Roshi Musée Sidney Walter, who is a teacher of priests at Prajna Zendu Center here in, well, actually, it's Lamy, it's not Santa Fe, will be my guest. Tune in for that. You know, you are the audience, you are the public, this is public access, and we're here to serve you. So if there's things you'd like me to talk about, subjects you'd like me to address, or you think there's a show you'd like to do with me, feel free to contact me. My contact information has been appearing and will roll at the end. Also, quickly, I am a counselor. I do spiritual counseling. Kind of what we've been talking about here really is what I believe in, is that the Spirit is the healer, and we need to learn how to apply that to heal from all the things that we create ourselves and find ourselves into. So if you think I can help you, contact me. My services are on a donation basis. And the last announcement really quickly is that I'm looking to do a show on Edgar Casey. If you have any desire and have any knowledge about wanting to get, about Edgar Casey, want to get on the air, contact me. I'd love to talk to you about it. So, our seventh and last question.
The scariest one of all.
Were you the best you could be?
This actually comes from a story about a rabbi who's dying. He has his disciples gathered around him at his deathbed, and he begins to cry. They say to him, Rabbi Susha, why are you crying? You have been a wonderful teacher. You've led an exemplary life. You're a leader in the community. Why are you crying? You're soon going to be reunited with God. And he says, I'm crying because when I stand before God, God is not going to ask me, why was I not more like Moses? But why was I not more like Susha? In other words, it's very comforting to know that we're not held to some external measure. The Kellogg School of Business Management, they say, don't strive for success, strive for significance. Don't look to some outside measure. Success is having $1 million in the bank or something like that. But rather, we're significant in your own world. In this case, the question of being asked of Susha is, why didn't he live up to his potential? Or did he live up to his potential fully? It's a question that only we can answer. Even though in this context it's being put in God's mouth, if you will, as a question that's asked when you die, we're the only ones who can answer that. And so it's a question that should lead us to look at our lives and say, what's holding us back? Just as what's holding us back from enjoying life as much as we can, what's keeping me from doing everything that I can? And in some ways, these other 6 questions come to bear. Are my priorities straight? Am I being honest externally in business, so am I being honest with myself? There are so many people in this world that I've run across who are not able to be honest with themselves. Everything that happens to them is not their fault. They play the victim so well without ever taking ownership of what happens in their life. Now, sometimes it's not you. You're walking along the street innocently and someone is driving drunk and they run over you. Don't take blame for that. But there are so many things that we do in personal relations, in talking with other people, in dealing with other people, where, as it's said in the weather world, mountains make their own weather. We're responsible for things that happen to us because of how we respond. Viktor Frankl talks about how the one true great human freedom that we're given in this life is our attitude, how we respond to things.
Whether we listen to the spirit or that evil inclination.
Yes.
Our choice.
Our choice.
I need to interrupt. We're almost out of time. This has been great. I thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
This has been a pleasure. I want to thank you all for tuning in.
Oh,
go ahead, quickly.
Copies of the 4 High Holy Day sermons dealing with these 7 questions are available on our website.
And the website has been flashing on the screen, and if you haven't caught it, contact me. I'll be happy to give it to you. And actually, just a quick announcement, it is www.sftbs.org.
Right.
Okay. Again, thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. There's a message here. The message is consistent. We get to choose the life we live to the extent of how we deal with what comes our way. And were we the best we could be? Were we attached to the external? Only you can answer that. If you think that there's improvement to be made, you can make it. You don't need anybody but yourself. So until next week, know that you are one with everybody else and with God, and demonstrate it. Make life a little bit nicer, a little bit easier for you and everybody else around you. Love and light, and we will talk to you and see you next week. Blessings. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.